Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to episode number 9 of Muslim Skeptic Live. I'm here with brother Dilly Hussain from the UK. Mashallah, he is a very active brother in Dawah. He is deputy director and editor of Five Pillars UK, which is a very prominent website publishing news and very excellent journalism surrounding the Muslim community. And he regularly appears on broadcasts and mainstream news channels to give his views and opinions on the Muslim community and Islam. So, mashallah, he's very prominent in the UK and increasingly internationally. So, we're very happy to have Brother Dilly with us to speak about a very important issue, which is the LGBT education that is now being promoted and imposed on the Muslim community through public schools in the UK. And this is under the banner of RSE. Is that correct, Dilly?
It is indeed, yes.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about this program and what has been the Muslim community's response?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This whole agenda about teaching same-sex relations and pro-LGBT lessons in schools, state schools, even primary schools where children as young as 5 and 6 would be taught these things, it's not necessarily a new phenomenon. It's not something which has all of a sudden taken place. It's been taking place and it's been in the pipeline for the last 5 years, 6 years. And slowly different schools have been rolling out pilot curriculums to basically promoting same-sex relations and pro-LGBT lifestyles and values. And the thing here is, it's not necessarily being taught as, under the law of this land, these relationships or these family structures exist, like how you would be taught different religions in religious education. That's not how it's being taught. The way this is being taught is not from a moral neutral standpoint. It's being taught beyond that of an equivalence to, let's say, opposite sex relations or marriage. Schools, teachers are basically telling pupils that, not only do these relationships exist legally in this country, which in essence, personally, I can understand that in a secular society, there is an element of teaching school pupils that, look, guys, in our society, different kinds of relationships exist. From a morally neutral standpoint, that's not taking place. What's taking place is, if you're a Muslim and you want to have same-sex relations, it's fine. If you're a Muslim and you disagree with these things, then this is problematic. So, these programs which are being piloted up and down the country, which also coincidentally happen to be taking place where there's a high demographic of Muslims, it's not from a moral neutral standpoint. It's actually a very passive form of proselytization, whereby Muslim schools, as well as other schools, by the way, it's not just Muslim schools, but there seems to be a disproportionate focus on Muslim schools, where people are being taught these kind of things, where it's okay to have two dads, it's okay to have two moms, it's okay for you to be a boy and come in tomorrow and identify as a girl, gender reassignment. All of these things are being rolled out under different banners, by the way. So the most prominent story that's probably taking place is in Birmingham, in a school called Parkfield Community School, where the pupils are 99% Muslim. Mm-hmm. Where there's this curriculum called the No Outsiders program. Now, the No Outsiders program doesn't fall under relationship education curriculum, which, by the way, from September 2020 will be mandatory in state schools. That's already been a bill pushed through. An overwhelming number of MPs have voted in support of it, and I must add that not even a single Muslim MP voted against it.
All right, for the US listeners, MP means member of parliament,
yes,
analogous to Congress people.
Yes. So, so this no outsiders policy, this is being rolled out under the remit of the Equalities Act 2010. Now, the Equalities Act of 2010 is a piece of legislation which stipulates 9 characteristics which are protected from discrimination, from services and so forth. And you'll find that this No Outsiders program disproportionately focuses on same-sex relations, on LGBTQ lifestyles, as well as gender reassignment, when one of the 9 protected characteristics of the Equalities Act is also religion and religious beliefs. Now, there's a whole moral argument versus a legal argument. The moral argument is that, look, parents essentially should be allowed to raise their children according to their philosophical, moral, and religious beliefs. Then there's a legal argument, which is that, look, hold on, under the law of this land, there needs to be some kind of expectation that these things need to be taught to children, because this is a society which we live in. If you want to go down the legal route, even down the legal route, you know, the whole, the focus or the sacred right of parents to be the primary teachers of their children, and for children to have access to an education which is in consistency with their parents' philosophical, moral, and religious views, is enshrined in the Human Rights Act. So there's two arguments, moral and philosophical, and there's a whole wider ideological discussion about why this agenda is being pushed through, who's lobbying it, and the manner in which it's being pushed.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of issues that you're touching on here that we're going to get into in more depth. I think that this is really something that is maybe a watershed for Muslims in the West, is how they're going to address this kind of issue. Because the arguments, and we're going to talk about this in more depth, but the kinds of arguments where you're appealing to religious freedom and you're appealing to equal rights, or you're appealing to human rights, I think that these kinds of arguments are limited, because when the discourse today, the secular discourse today about LGBT, is that this is not an issue of your personal religious beliefs, in the same way that racism is not a matter of your personal religious beliefs. If your religion tells you to discriminate against black people or other kinds of racial minorities, that's not acceptable. You can't claim a religious exception to that, or appeal to religious freedom to be able to practice that kind of racial discrimination. And so they're making this connection and this analogy between race and also sexual orientation. And they're saying the entire argument is that Muslims are being discriminatory in this incorrect, illegal, immoral way towards a specific class of people, these sexual minorities. So I think that that's really the crux of the issue. If we continue to appeal to some of these liberal secular concepts, I think it's a losing strategy. But what do you think about that?
I mean, look, even let's put the whole, just for a moment, from an anecdotal point of view, if we put aside the pro-LGBT and same-sex relations curriculum that's currently taking place, even if we look at the issue of free speech, or whether we have the right to critique religion, or even when the Charlie Hebdo incident happened, you know, there's this whole discussion about, okay, then if you have the right to be offended, or if you don't want your religion to be critiqued, you know, if we basically go down that line of freedoms and these kind of essentially Western secular liberal concepts, it will come back to you, because there's been cases where basically Muslim sisters have gone on to public platforms and said, you know, I wear the niqab, I wear the hijab because this is my freedom. Then I've seen it myself where it's been countered. Well, if that's your freedom, do you respect my right to wear bikinis and dress half naked, which is something that you essentially see as immoral? You have the right to proselytize your faith. Do I have the right to criticize your prophet? So yeah, you know, if we follow these kind of line of arguments, they can and have become own goals. I think the reason why a number of Muslim activists have highlighted the kind of legal arguments, I hope this is the case anyway, whenever I've mentioned these aspects, is to highlight a double standard. I don't think there's anything wrong per se to cite certain legislation or certain alleged moral position that
Well, that's
they
the
may
thing.
have.
This is the um, lose-lose situation that secularism puts us in, because let's go to the bikini example. Is, the niqabi says, well, I have the right to wear this, I have the freedom to wear this, and then the other side says, well, okay, then I have the liberty to wear bikini. And in fact, within Muslim societies, that's not allowed. You have, in certain Muslim societies and countries, there's public indecency where I can't go out in a bikini or a mini skirt, otherwise I'll be arrested. So you, the niqabi Muslim on this program, are you going to go and petition for these Muslim countries to not
Yeah,
enforce Islamic
and,
law?
and that's the problem. And you'll even find, sadly, even when it comes to a number of prominent activists who, rightly oppose things like Islamophobia and racism and so forth, when you end up allying with certain elements of non-Muslim activism, right, which tends to be the liberal left, you'll find that it's a conditional alliance. It's a conditional alliance which basically stipulates, I'm going to stick up for you when it comes to Islamophobia and racism, but you need to stick up for us when it comes to, pro-LGBT and same-sex relations issues. But just on the point about, these own goals, when you go down that argument of freedoms and freedom of expression and freedom of religion, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with citing them to highlight a hypocrisy, to highlight a double standard. But if you're going to make that, if you're going to make that the basis of your argument, then I do find it certainly problematic, of course.
Sure, I agree with you. We can point to inconsistency. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing, but once you're talking about their double standards, then you're on their playing field. And so what they'll say is that, fine, actually it's not a double standard. For example, when it comes to religious freedom, yeah, we are staunch defenders of religious freedom, except Islam is not a religion, it's a cult. This is the kind of argumentation we find in the American discourse, is that they'll say, well, Islam has these kinds of cultish aspects, and so these practices like wearing niqab is not protected under freedom of religion. The thing is that the game itself is biased, because who defines what religion is and who gets to set those parameters. And so they can claim that actually we're not hypocrites, we're not applying a double standard. You've simply misunderstood what religion is. Religion is this kind of secular, private, what you do in your own home, blah blah blah.
Ritualistic.
Right.
Yes,
So
yeah.
this is the basis where in France, in Germany, now in Quebec, in Canada, they're arguing for restricting religious expression through the hijab, through clothing. So I mean, we can point out the hypocrisy from our standpoint, but from their standpoint, they're not going to concede that. But I mean, we can talk pragmatics. I think that what you're highlighting is very important. That what is the pragmatic way to argue certain points? I think we just have to be aware that we're playing on an uneven playing field, and that there are easy ways that we can get trapped. Same with this LGBT issue. Like, I think that we have and this is a problem with secular discourse that academics will know. The academics who are critical of liberal secularism, they'll say that secularism prevents people from making moral claims. Okay, moral claims like, well, this action is wrong, or this action is right, or this action is detestable, morally detestable. In the secular discourse, when you come to the public sphere, you have to put everything in coded language and say, well, this is opposing my rights. This is contradicting my freedoms. This is in line with our liberties. Okay, so all of this liberal language is used. And I mean, we see that Muslims kind of fall into that, and we're forced to in many ways. Otherwise, we won't have a place at the table to discuss. But it's a rigged game when we have to. What I would like to say, and we'll talk about this, like what I think we should be saying is, well, we oppose this kind of education, this RSE, two dads, two moms, education for school children, not because it's somehow decreasing our religious freedom, but because we are morally opposed to this. We feel that this is something that's morally incorrect, and this is something damaging. It causes harm, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a big distinction there.
And the parents in Birmingham, mashallah, the parents in Birmingham have said that quite clearly. They said that, look, the fact that our children are being taught that it's okay to have same-sex relations, to have two dads and two moms, and not only that, even just having relationships outside of wedlock, these things are morally and philosophically against our way of life. Now, believe that they have, alhamdulillah, they have maintained on that, but again, from a pragmatic point of view, from the point of view of the mechanisms and the process in which they have to challenge these things, Daniel, they've had to obviously look at the legal aspect, the legislative aspect, and so forth. I don't think if they were given the choice just to say, look, right, we want to opt out of this, I think vast swathes of Muslims, Christians, and Jews would opt out, but they're in a predicament where there are processes and mechanisms to obviously voice their opposition in a manner in which is within the legal framework. Hence why you're seeing references to the Equalities Act, references to the Human Rights Act. You know, we know very well, even this whole notion of human rights, is something which has been arbitrarily defined by secular superpowers, and they will apply it as and when they feel is apt, right? And you know, I think Muslims in the West, they know it's an uphill struggle, right? They know it's a rigged game. They know it's an uphill struggle, but from a pragmatic point of view, they have to assess that, okay, what are the different options that we have? We can maintain all day long that this is something which, quite frankly, we oppose at the very core of it, right?
Right.
But then where do you move on from that? Where do you move on from that point? And that's the perspective, you know, that's the perspective of the parents, of the legal advice that they're being given. You know, fine, okay, we've made it very clear that Islam opposes same-sex relations and any kind of relationships outside of wedlock and so forth. Fine, you've made that position. How do you now actively oppose or try to challenge this curriculum within the legal framework of the land? And hence why you're seeing references to certain legislation and so forth. And as you mentioned, you know, when we turn to these arguments, not to highlight inconsistencies, you'll find on goals down the line. You'll find it. You see it all the time. I've seen it so many times, whether it's about critiquing the Prophet ﷺ, whether it's about the niqab, so many issues. Once you go down that freedoms and expressions argument, it will always get thrown back to you. They'll always come back at you.
Right. Hold on one second. I think a lot of the viewers are complaining about low volume, and so I want to make sure that everyone's able to hear you.
That's absolutely fine.
Are you closer? Can you get closer to your mic?
This is the closest I can get.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to increase the volume. This hasn't been an issue. In the past, the issue has been the volume of my mic was too high, and now it's too low for some odd reason. Maybe if I turn up this setting. And this is supposed to be a professional mic, so technical difficulties are always the issue.
It may be from my end. I'm not using any specific mic. I'm using the laptop mic.
Yeah. So I think they're saying my voice is low. Okay, hold on. I can get closer to here. That's not really. How about now? Hello? Yeah, apologies for the technical difficulty. How about now? Okay, I'll just hold the mic closer depending on if you're speaking or I'm speaking.
Okay.
So let's take a look at you in action, basically. And you're invited to Good Morning Britain, I guess, to talk about this issue with Piers Morgan and his people. So, can you give us some context and any thoughts on it before we get into it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say, and there's a lot that wasn't said on the show. But basically, the producers contacted Five Pillars, and they wanted myself to go onto the show and discuss the protests that were taking place in Birmingham and generally the pro-LGBT curriculum. Now, initially, we redirected them to other individuals who we felt were more qualified, more experienced, who were actually more involved in this forte. But they came back and they rejected two people because Mike Wilshaw, who was the senior inspector of Ofsted, he actually refused to share a panel with two of the people that I suggested. And then another person who was involved as well, they just weren't available. So then they came back, and Five Pillars have been reporting the Birmingham protests and the parents' opposition to the No Outsiders program for the last 6-7 weeks quite closely. So I was invited on the premise of discussing it from a news point of view as a Muslim journalist. Of course, there was always that feeling in the back that this could be a setup job. This could be literally they need a Muslim boogeyman, which he tried. He tried presenting it as such, and I hope that I counted it as much as I could. But and I went into the interview with a number of, so many different arguments and so many different counter arguments and so many positions. But the reality is, Daniel, that when you're on these platforms, it becomes a bear pit, and it's not. You don't get that equal opportunity to basically convey your views without being interrupted, without being spoken to, without feeling that there's an inquisition on your views. Whereas the white middle class liberal, who's actually a conservative but nevertheless still liberal, his views are aired uninterrupted. He gets to say whatever he wants, uninterrupted, and essentially it just becomes a gang up. But even given that, reflecting upon my own contributions on that show, it could have been significantly better. And I'm not just saying that because I have a certain standard to myself, because I've been up against some of the most ardent Islamophobic presenters, right? Nikki Campbell, John Ware, Andrew Neil, like the creme de la creme of these nasty presenters, right? I've been up against most of them, and alhamdulillah, I've done okay against them. But this particular incident, I was somewhat slightly overwhelmed. I was expecting attacks, but not at that kind of veracity, and which kind of affected my responses. So any khair was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and all mistakes and shortcomings were from myself.
Right. All right. Well, Jazakallah khairah for actually taking on that burden of speaking. Well, I think you spoke well, mashallah. I think that, like, you acknowledge certain things you could have said differently. So let's look at that. But it's still a lot of pressure to be under to actually be on a public broadcast like that. So let's share this and go through it step by step.
Well, this is the row which has led to furious protests by parents and left teachers feeling distraught.
But should schools which made the decision to cancel controversial lessons on gay and transgender rights now be forced to resume them?
Well, Sir Michael Wilshaw, the former Chief Inspector of Schools and head of Ofsted, thinks so. Believes parents need to remember we're living in a liberal country where these things are taught to our children. But alongside him is journalist Dilly Hussain, who says if we live in a liberal society, then the views of Muslims, for instance, need to be taken into account. Very good morning to you both.
Morning.
Dilly Hussain, what is your issue with these lessons for primary school children about lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans relationships and individuals?
I mean, in terms of the events that have taken place in Birmingham, I feel it's a symptomatic issue of a wider problem, and that is the increasing sexualisation of children in British society, and secondly, the encroachment by the state to essentially intervene in the fundamental rights of parents to raise their children.
So a couple of issues there. Firstly, the Chief Executive of the Trust, which has introduced the No Outsiders lesson, saying we're not teaching children, for instance, about same-sex couples in the sense of sexual relationships. All they're doing is teaching there are different families. There may be children at these schools who have two mums or two dads, and it is simply about explaining that doesn't make them outsiders. We need to accept that. What is your issue with that?
I think it's not just an issue of same-sex relations, but it's just any type of sexual relations and sexual labels and gender identity and these kind of things which are being exposed to children at this young age.
But children know they've got, for instance, a mum and a dad.
Yes.
So, and that's not sexualising children. So why not teach that some children have a mum and a mum, or a dad and a dad, or perhaps just one mum and no dad, or vice versa?
So I think this is very deceptive, like what they're doing here. They want to portray it as not being sexual in nature. We're just talking about families. I mean, first of all, it's not just about sexuality. It's not just about Muslims do have a problem with the notion of two dads and two moms. That is something that is wrong, and that is something that is immoral and destructive in all the ways that we can talk about. But so they're trying to pin you and say, well, oh, we're not going to talk about sexuality. We're just going to talk about families. What do you have wrong? What's your problem with that? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that the education, that part of that curriculum is to teach children that it's okay to, if you're attracted to the same sex, if you are a boy but you feel like you're a girl, or vice versa. These are also parts of the curriculum, and the textbooks or the children's books that they're reading to kindergartners are about gender fluidity and these other aspects of gender and sex. So this is a complete misrepresentation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, a consistent theme that you'll see in that interview is that whenever I made a point which was the crux of the discussion, so, my very first statement was that what's happening in Birmingham is symptomatic of two wider issues. Number one, the sexualization of children in society, period. Yeah?
Right.
Number two, a secular state's encroachment on the parental rights of how to raise children. Those are the two, what I believe are the two major issues. We're living in a society where hypersexualization is increasingly normalized from popular media, popular fashion, from every aspect of life. Yeah? That's one issue. Issue number two is, why is a secular state interfering with what the role of the parent is in trying to raise their children? She wasn't interested in that. She was not interested in those 2 points. She wanted to quickly move on to, right, but it's not sexualization, it's two parents and it's fine. And what you'll see, and this is a well-known tactic in the mainstream media, they're eventually kind of like circling you and trying to pressure you into a particular line of argument, which is, it's not sexualization, right. It's two parents, and it's two dads and two moms, and it's fine. The thing here is, in the No Outsiders program, they're not saying that in this society, there's a whole discussion about whether even children as young as 5 and 6 should even be taught these things, which they shouldn't. Children should just be children. What interest is there in a 5-6-year-old knowing anything about marriage and sex or any of this stuff? And again, there's another conflation here. They just think that it's just about same-sex relations, pro-LGBT. No, the position is that children as young as 5, 6, and 7 don't need to be taught about sex, period. And if they are, then that should be the responsibility of the parents, solely and exclusively. But the issue here is two. They're not teaching it from a moral, neutral standpoint. If we go down that argument, they're not. Because in religious education, you talk about Hinduism and Sikhism and Islam and atheism. Never will your teacher tell you that, by the way, kids, it's okay to be one of these things. In fact, kids, you should subscribe to one of these things. No, they just tell you that these religions exist. Khalas, that's it. Whereas in this curriculum, let me give you an actual example. In this curriculum, one of the teachers who's spearheading this, the assistant head teacher, Andrew Moffat, he held a class and he said that anyone who opposes two dads or two mums, they are an outsider to the No Outsiders program. And that was when a Muslim child voiced their criticism about what they were being taught. That's not morally neutral.
Wait, so would you be okay with them taking things like that out and just saying, this is a happy two dad family, and this is a happy two mom family, and this is a happy two mom two dad family, but without saying you have to
No,
accept
no,
this,
no.
but just
No, the issue here is that these things, from an Islamic standpoint, is incorrect. It's prohibited. It's haram. These things are not for our children to be taught, let alone from a point in which it's being normalized and advocated.
well,
But the scenario, but the scenario. Look again. What we're going to end up happening in this podcast, Daniel, is that we're going to have the underlying Islamic standpoint, which I hope for viewers is unequivocally clear, and that is that these any relationship between a man and a woman outside of wedlock is unequivocally haram. It's prohibited, right? But what you will find is that in the scenario that we find ourselves in, you will find that how do we argue this? How do we oppose this? How do we oppose this in any meaningful way which will result in either the scrapping of this curriculum, which is not going to happen, by the way? How do we then try at least watering it down? And I hate it. I hate that we have to resort to these things, but it is what it is, right?
so can you tell me if there's any possibility for, in the UK context, for Muslims to create their own institutions? I mean, like in terms of schooling.
I mean, look, a number of parents are considering homeschooling. Homeschooling is the only way in which you can essentially overcome and bypass this. But I
What
guess
about
if
Islamic schools?
Islamic, the vast majority of Islamic faith schools or Islamic ethos schools, they are still subjected to Ofsted inspections, and we know that from a number of madrasas and a number of Islamic faith schools have been the subject of a systematic targeting, a witch hunt by the Ofsted, where the very same things are being taught in Jewish schools in North London, right? And it's just a disproportionate focus. And we're not even talking about things that, discussing that, same-sex relationships are haram. No, we're talking about merely omitting the discussion of these things. Schools are being penalized for not discussing this, for not proportionately conveying how British secular society is. So Islamic faith schools, Islamic ethos schools, Islamic free schools, madrasas, they all, unfortunately, are being targeted by Ofsted and by the state, which falls under the wider context of countering violent extremism. And this is another important point. This entire agenda is being, no matter how many times Muslims want to bring in their Christian and Jewish allies in this struggle, fundamentally the Muslim community is being seen and targeted from the prism of countering violent extremism from a national security threat. Now we have a group of Muslims in our country, and these guys believe in things which we feel fundamentally oppose what we define to be British values. Again, an arbitrary set of secular liberal values which is being enforced upon people. And remember this, from a legislative point of view, if you don't subscribe to how the current government defines fundamental British value, you're an extremist. And that can have an effect on you on so many facets of life, from employment, from academia. You can have your children taken away from you. There have been children taken away from Muslim parents for merely voicing normative Islamic views, right? So the only way forward, and the discussion that's currently taking place, is homeschooling, right?
Right.
But what's happening is that once you get thousands and thousands of Muslims homeschooling, you'll find some other policy legislation that will then start targeting homeschooling. But for now, homeschooling is the only kind of way that you can possibly overcome the RSE curriculum totally. Islamic faith schools and state schools are still subject to Ofsted inspections.
So I think what you're describing is quite dire. Sorry.
It is.
I think that, but I think one thing that is good for people to recognize, for Muslims to recognize, is that it's inherent to the secular world, to these secular countries, because you were mentioning an example of schools teaching about different religions. And do we want our children to be learning about different religions in a neutral way? Right? Sikhism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism. even that aspect of a child's education can be problematic, because you're raising children to have a kind of a universalist conception that all religions are equal, all religions are the same, or at least we have to be neutral with respect to them. So this is even something like, or any kind of subject that's being taught within secular education, within biology, teaching Darwinism, teaching evolutionary biology and evolutionary history. All of these aspects of the secular education, in many ways, some of them explicit, some of it more subtle, are conflicting with the Islamic paradigm and some of the Islamic values that we would want to impart to children. That's really why, with at least on a personal level, my wife and I have decided to homeschool our children, because we think that it's inescapable, even if you can resist certain aspects of that liberal secular project, and it's materialism, it's scientism, it's evolutionaryism, it's pro-sex, LGBT attitude. Even if you can avoid some of it, you're still going to get the other parts of it, right? So it's almost an intractable situation when it comes to this educational system. And I think it's no surprise that you find Muslims who grow up and they have no semblance of Iman, or they have very little semblance, they have very little connection to the deen. And it's not because for lack of effort from their parents, it's just that they are going to an institution for 40 hours a week, public schooling, where they're being indoctrinated to naturally oppose and to have an aversion to Islamic principles. So it's I think it's a much larger issue than just homosexuality.
So, but I think, Daniel, if we start looking at it from that point of view, right, then we need to be asking very, very far more serious questions, and that is the future of Islam and Muslims in the Western world, right? For Muslim diasporas in the Western world, if you want to be, raising your children in a manner in which is in accordance with Islamic values, principles, and ethics, and the Islamic paradigm, is living in the West with the existing status quo. Is it really the way forward? Is it time to make hijrah? Counter argument is, where you can make hijrah to? Which part of the Muslim world, the Muslim majority world, hasn't been affected by a very similar way of thinking, right? I do think, however, and parents, there is this mentality, Daniel, where, in the UK, the vast majority of Muslims here are from the Indian subcontinent. So they have Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indians, yeah? Right. Of course, we have other Muslims, but the bulk of the majority of the Muslims in the UK come from the Indian subcontinent. And there seems to be this kind of outsourcing and delegation of parenting from the school to the masjid, yeah? So 30 hours to 35 hours a week in schools, 7 to 10 hours in the masjids where you do hifz and you do tajweed, and that's it. You're literally feeding them, making sure they're dressed in clothes, and send them back off to schools. I think there has to be a serious focus for Muslim parents. If you're going to decide to continue sending your children to state schools, non-denominational secular state schools, then you need to start seriously focusing on your children's upbringing. Because if you're not addressing many of these issues, they're going to be taught it elsewhere. And I say this to all the brothers and sisters, especially the uncles and the brothers who are in the taxi trade, who are in the restaurant business, who are in the factory business, who are working day and night, right? And why do Muslim fathers and parents work day and night? You work day and night for the security and the betterment of your children. But then you end up neglecting the tarbiyah. You end up neglecting what they should be taught at home, and going to schools strong and being able to counter, if not counter, to at least resist some of these things. And I also want to make a quick comment as well. Alhamdulillah, let me tell you something, Daniel. Where I'm from in Bedford, and many predominantly Muslim cities and towns in the UK, even the brothers and the sisters, yes, there is a growing movement of woke, liberal, sitting on the fence kind of Muslims, with a kind of pseudo-perennialist thinking. Yeah, there is an element of that that's growing. But alhamdulillah, there is still a large constituency of Muslim youth, right? Third generation, fourth generation Muslims or even though they may not have the ilm, the knowledge, the ideological and conceptual arguments to counter these things, that they will tell you that, you know what, these things are haram, these things are not right, we oppose these things, right? And that's refreshing to see. It's refreshing to see many from the general awam opposing these things, that they've not been given any kind of traditional Islamic learning, or they've not undergone any kind of traditional learning. It's just something which they've been raised, even if you want to argue from a cultural point of view, that, you know, pro-LGBT, same-sex relations, you know, all religions lead to the same destination. You know, we oppose these things. We disagree with these things. These things are haram. It can't be. And that's refreshing to see.
I think that situation might be different in the UK than in the US, because
yeah, we know that.
I think that if you're going to talk about parents making these, taking on this kind of effort to provide the tarbiyah and provide that educational level to counteract everything that's happening in society, I think that it's very tall order. It's a very tall order. It's like, for example, I maybe it's easier for Muslims to envision that the secular system is imparting a kind of religion. The secular schools, the state schools, the public schools are imparting a kind of religion, the secular religion. And so imagine like you are having your child go to a Catholic school for 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week, being taught Catholic doctrine, Christian theology, and then they come home, you know, after they've spent the most productive, wakeful hours of the day, and then you as a parent, after your day of work or whatever, have to try to counteract that. It's very difficult, especially when you don't have a curriculum, you don't have a way to address these specific kinds of secular ideologies. In fact, many of the older generation is confused, very confused about these topics. And I think that there's a big educational gap in terms of addressing these kinds of topics from a critical perspective. And so people who follow Muslim Skeptic or watch this weekly show know that I rant about this quite often, but I think that it's a big problem. So let's continue with the clip here.
I think the reason why parents have resorted to petitions and protests and withdrawals in Birmingham is that there was a breakdown in communication, a lack of consultation, a lack of transparency. And I don't think any parent in the right state of mind would want to deprive their children of education. I don't think anyone would want to resort to protest. But
underpinning this, look, let's cut to the quick here. Underpinning this is a belief by the Muslim parents involved in these protests that being gay is inherently wrong, right? It's part of their belief.
Yes.
I mean, you're a Muslim.
Yes.
What do you think? Is homosexuality, in your view,
a sin?
Yeah, according to the standpoint of my faith, yes. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't coexist in peace with people of different sexual
But you're not coexisting in peace. You're making very vocal protests and taking kids out of schools. And I think it's driven not so much for the reasons that you say, but it's driven by homophobia.
No,
right?
I know.
Which is not actually that peaceful. It's actually an aggressive act.
I think that's unequivocally untrue, Pierce. But the reason why that is because the sentiments of the parents in Birmingham has essentially been the lack of consultation, the lack of transparency, and the lack of communication
If the trust had communicated with the...
Yeah, so that's where I think that you could have said something differently. I'm sure you recognize that as well, that the lack of transparency... I mean, that's a relatively small issue. Many parts of the curriculum aren't really addressed with consultation with parents. But, I mean, the thing is that when Piers Morgan is saying you're being homophobic, okay, well, let's unpack that. Do Muslims have a problem with homosexual behavior? Yes, of course. And these are the reasons why. And different things can be spoken of in terms of what this kind of sexuality causes in society, the degeneracy of it, how it conflates gender roles and confuses gender roles and diminishes important concepts like what does it mean to be a man, what does it mean to be a woman. This is the kind of decadence that can really damage society, can cause, we've seen so many civilizations crumble because of their fall into sexual decadence, and you have even non-Muslim writers and historians who note the rise and fall of civilization. When civilization reaches a point of sexual degeneracy and decadence where you see promiscuity, you see homosexuality, then that inevitably leads to a fall of civilization. Even secular historians will recognize these kinds of harms. So yes, as Muslims, we're very concerned about this phenomenon of homosexuality becoming rampant in society, and we have our revelation-based truths on this topic, and we also have secular historians have acknowledged the same. Secular psychologists and academics have acknowledged the same. So I think this is a moral conversation, if you get what I'm saying here. It's a moral conversation about right and wrong, about the nature of human beings, about the nature of society and civilization, as opposed to, I think, what they're trying to do is try to get you on a technicality.
You see, Daniel, the thing is, you're absolutely spot on there, my dear brother. But, you know, the premise upon which I was invited onto the show was specifically discuss the ongoing incidents and events in Birmingham with the parents protesting. Now, the argumentation of the parents, and I spoke to some of them before going onto the show, and they pleaded and they requested that please, you know, if you're going there to speak on our behalf, whether you like it or not, please convey some of these arguments, right? We were not consulted. There was no communication when there should have been. There was a breakdown in communication. We were given false promises, etc., etc. Now, having a moral and ideological discussion with Piers Morgan on that kind of platform, and I say this with utmost respect to all the brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, who have messaged me privately and have given me nasiha publicly as well. We can have that. But know that this is not a university debate where you get uninterrupted time slots to make your point. It's literally sound bites. It's a battle of sound bites. It's not where, like our brother, you know, some of our respected brothers who are in apologetics, they get 10 minutes to refute the Trinity, and then the Christian gets 10 minutes to refute this. It doesn't work like that. It's literally a battlefield of sound bites, right? And whilst there were a number of ideological sound bites I could have countered it, which I didn't, I think at that point, if I'm to be honest with myself, in my mind, I kept trying bringing it back to the reason why I was invited on. And the reason why I was invited on was why are Muslim parents in Birmingham withdrawn their children and why are they protesting, right? And whilst I could have had a moral argument, whilst I could have made it into an ideological argument, I just don't see how it would have planned out in the way in which many had hoped it would have planned out. It just isn't that platform. But of course, sure, you know, there were so many counters to what Piers Morgan said, which, you know, reflection that I could have come back with, that I didn't, frankly. But I think we need to move away from this. But that entire debate was 16 minutes, right? From that 16 minutes, I got to speak about 4.5 minutes. The version which ITV put out there was 10 minutes. They cut 6 minutes out of it. In that space of time, you're not going to have, you know, a deep, complex, in-depth, ideological, moral discussion with these guys. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in that. They're interested to make Dilly Hussain look like a homophobic bigot. That's what they're here to.
Right. No, I agree. This is, you know, not the best venue to have a very deep philosophical discussion.
That response should have been more clinical. It should have been more refined, and it certainly should have been more ideological and philosophical in the kind of precision in how I responded. And as I mentioned, you know, you think about these after reflecting.
No doubt about it. Like, you know, I've been involved with different kinds of speaking engagements where after the fact I realized that, okay, I should have said this, I should have worded it like this. So the point of this is not to attack Dilly and to make an example.
Not attack per se, but the feedback that I've received,
right,
alhamdulillah, has been very constructive, and may Allah bless all the brothers and sisters, not only in the UK but from around the world, from different groups and movements, who have given me constructive feedback. And the vast majority of them are correct. I just want to just add that in that particular moment in time, in that environment, it really isn't as easy as you think.
No doubt. So let's just the point of this. So my intention with having you on again is not to like try to put you on the spot. The only reason is to want to. Yeah, it was a setup.
How else am I supposed to improve, my dear brother? How are Muslims how are Muslim
No,
representatives?
I'm not concerned about you actually, my dear brother. I'm not concerned about you improving. You improving. I know that you already knew when I contacted you. I didn't say anything. I just said, would you like to speak about this topic on my weekly show? And you said, sure. And then you gave this whole explanation of I should have done better. I should have said this. I should have said that. So that you understand, mashallah. But the point of this, what I wanted us to talk about and explain is so that the rest of the community, others can see this, others who are invited onto these programs can watch this, inshallah, learn from the experience, right? Learn from your experience and get tips on how, okay, if it is a soundbite culture and you don't get much time to talk, okay, now you have that expectation. What sound bites are we going to put out, right? What are the sound bites that are going to win the conversation? What are the sound bites that are going to silence the opposition? I think that's what we should be really interested in. This is a very excellent point that you bring. It's not just about the content, and it's not just about the ideology and having the correct theological position. It's also about how do you express that in on a Good Morning Britain interview or in a newspaper article or so on and so forth. So that's really the intention here. Let's continue, and then because I know you have limited time, so let's just continue.
Those parents, perhaps, who think homosexuality is a sin, what would those parents have done? Withdraw their children from those classes?
I mean, hypothetically speaking, I can't really make a comment about the issue, the crux of the issue.
What would you do?
What would I do? I mean, there'd have to be, as someone who's not a parent, but an uncle to 12 nephews and nieces, engagement and dialogue is always the first.
But what would you do if you knew that the school was teaching children, as you say, your nieces and nephews perhaps, that some children of that age have gay parents? What would you do in that?
I mean, my personal view is that the sexualization of children and the exposure to any kind of sexual
They're not talking about sex, are they? They're talking about the relationship.
Because you're subscribing to certain sexual identities.
Okay, let's bring this to Michael.
It's same.
So Michael, you've heard.
Here I would have just said, and again, hindsight is 20/20. I would just say that, I have no problem with teaching my kids that there are gay couples. I actually would want, when they reach a certain age, to teach them about this reality, that there are gay couples and so forth. I would just want to also emphasize that this is wrong. This is something immoral, that they're doing something that is contrary to morality.
But a secular state school wouldn't do that, though, Daniel. A secular state school, a secular non-denominational school wouldn't say that, by the way, guys, in this society in which we live, we have these different kind of relationships and family constructs. But by the way, it's immorally wrong as well.
Well, first of all, they were teaching this, or this was their attitude not more than 10 years ago. Okay, and 10 years ago, the moral attitude within secular society was that same-sex marriage is immoral. Marriage is between a man and a woman. So, okay, what has changed? Like, how can they make such a monster? And then even today, there are some, are they teaching about child marriage, for example? That's a type of marriage that exists in the world today. In many Muslim countries, you have a much older man and a younger wife who might be 12, 13, 14. What about... Yeah, in some states, it's also the age of consent is, very low compared to what liberals consider sensible. Should we teach about that kind of marriage? Should we teach about polygamy? Those are types of marriage as well. Is that part of the No Outsiders program? These are the kinds of things that I think we could bring up in these conversations.
But just on that point, what was I going to say? Look, the whole kind of goalpost shifting of liberal morality, I don't think that's something that we should be unsurprised by. Maybe those who are unaware need to understand that the vast majority of the Western countries in which we reside in, progressive liberal society will continuously move its moral goalposts because it's entirely arbitrary according to its whims and its nafs, because it's negated entirely the divine. right? Is negated entirely any kind of importance or due respect from the divine scripture. And I mean, I'm talking even from a Christian point of view, right? There simply is no regard of it, even though you can argue from one point of view that secular liberal morality is a kind of evolution of Christian morality post kind of Reformation. You can argue that, right? The thing is, prior to 2013 in the UK, it was illegal that two individuals of the same gender could get married, right? From 2013 onwards, it became legal, right? 30 years ago, Margaret Thatcher had outlawed the teaching of same-sex relations and homosexuality in any capacity in schools, right? So for brothers and sisters who are watching this podcast and who are not necessarily that well-read in liberalism or kind of secular liberal nation states and how their policies and legislation and generally how society evolves and progresses, these moral goalposts will continuously move. It will continuously move because it's an arbitrary kind of set of it's an arbitrary way of thinking, whereby literally it's whims and desires. It's
Well,
the whims and desires of the mind.
This shows like what kind of a bad position that it puts Muslims in. I think that it would be great like to have these kinds of conversations and how morality is shifting so quickly, and on what basis is this morality shifting, and why should we take that as coherent? You want to have a secular discussion? Well, let's have a secular discussion on what it means for morality to shift and change and constantly be in flux. I think that's an important thing to bring up in these kinds of conversations. But then also, beyond just the flux, I think that Muslims should be able to look at... I lost my train of thought. The goalposts are shifting and I lost it.
And then those goalposts continue to move on. Dan, if I may, I just want to add another point as well, right? And it's important. There's a major misconception that the kind of pro-LGBT and gender identity politics is something which is exclusive and predominant within the liberal left, right? Whilst that may have some truth to it, remember this, it was a conservative government, conservative right-wing government in the UK that passed the same-sex relations bill. It's a conservative government that has now voted, that has essentially fast-tracked the RSE bill through the House of Lords, right? It was a conservative right-winger, Sir Michael Wilshaw, that was the co-guest that was promoting this. Now, so I think this kind of, this whole kind of, the pro-LGBT and same-sex relations agenda, it actually transcends the political spectrum. It's not exclusive to one or the other, because ultimately it's an outcome of the secular liberal way of life, the secular liberal ideology, in which the liberal left and the right fall under. They fall under this umbrella. And it transcends. Just because the liberal left might be more vocal about it, just because they may wear some of these feelings on their sleeves, ultimately it's many right-wing governments, right-wing Christian governments in Europe that are also pushing these bills, these similar bills that are through. So just an important point that it's not exclusive and restricted to one aspect of the political spectrum. It transcends political labels.
No, absolutely. I think that the conservatives and the Christian traditionalists out there in the political sphere, they have failed. They have had a spectacular failure in their inability to address these attacks on their traditional values and on their religion. And so we as Muslims should learn from that and realize and recognize that this is what liberal secularism does. It secularizes people who are religious. In fact, that is part of the secular project. It was part of the colonial project. So secularism is a tool for exactly this purpose, and we see the corpses strewn about all around us, and so we have to be smart and recognize that's the game that's being played. The point that I had wanted to make that I blanked on for a second is that you're mentioning flux, you're mentioning goalpost shifting. Look at the difficulty that this puts Muslims in, because our values are based on a tradition. It's based on the past. It's based on the Quran and Sunnah, which does not change. There's not new revelation that's being revealed. So we are constantly going to be put in a bind. We're constantly being put on the defensive. We're constantly being attacked because their values are changing, becoming more degenerate, becoming more loose and promiscuous and so forth. And then we have to constantly defend ourselves. So I think this is important to know. If Muslims are going to compromise on this issue of LGBT, this is just a slide, a continuous slide. We've already compromised on many other sexual issues that are around us in society. We've compromised on issues of gender separation, at least in the US, maybe more so than in the UK. We've compromised on many of these issues. It's just a continuous slide, and it's not going to end. Even if Muslims start wearing these rainbow hijabs, now the new issue is transgenderism, and we need to allow women dressed as men and men dressed as women to go into each other's spaces. So it's never ending.
You know when Napoleon Bonaparte, when he entered Egypt, right? It's recorded that he said, "I have no problem with the people of this land reciting the Quran in their masajid. No problem." There's even recorded testimonies that Napoleon Bonaparte, he used to like listening to the Quran. But he said, but that is where it should belong. It belongs in the mosques. As soon as this book comes out in public, this causes a problem for the French Empire's objectives in Egypt, right? So brothers and sisters, having your masajid, being allowed to wear a thobe and have your beard, being allowed your halal butchers and your Hajj and Umrah operators, the secular state has no problem with those things.
Right now they don't. Maybe, you never know.
Right now they don't. But as it stands, they'd like you to, in fact, be more immersed in these kind of things. Yeah, sure. But as soon as you start opposing the status quo, as soon as you start flagging when that moral goalpost starts shifting and start saying that, you know what, quite frankly, with my deen or my way of life, I don't agree with that. That's when you become public enemy number one. So be mindful of this. And another point I want to add also is, and I believe you and Brother Abdullah Andalusi and Dr. Salman Butt and others have correctly highlighted this. This kind of subscription to gender identity is something that's not Islamic. In Islam, we have defined roles. We have man, woman, believer, disbeliever, old and young, sane and insane, right? We have certain categories of how we define identity. Islam has never, it has never defined identity according to sexuality. This is essentially, again, a post-colonial Western secular construct, something which, essentially is not from our tradition. And again, another thing, reflecting upon my interview, maybe some things should have been clarified. So the fact that, when he said, when Piers Morgan said, so do you believe homosexuality is a sin? Now, it was assumed, I had assumed that when you say someone is a homosexual, it's not that, I just have impulses and attractions and feelings towards the same sex, but I'm holding back on it. No, when it's used on that platform, a gay Muslim, it's assumed that that Muslim identifies as gay and has a lifestyle which is in accordance to that batil, right? It's not, so a number of brothers and sisters fed back that, brother, I have, a number of classical ulama, they spoke about how men should be around young, unshaven boys. Classical ulama
They should not be.
They should not be, yes. And they're right. You are absolutely right. But again, in that platform, it's assumed as a given that when someone identifies as a homosexual, they're engaged in that lifestyle. Yeah? That's why when he asked me, do you believe it's a choice? I said yes, squarely. I said yes, because what I meant in that regard is that when you decide to act on those impulses and those attractions and those feelings, it is no different to the one who wants to act on drinking khamr or gambling or committing zina or having an affair with his brother's wife. It's the same, right? But once you actively identify, so another thing, if you're someone who has attraction towards the same sex, right, and you're a Muslim, or you identify as being a Muslim, you actively go out of your way to identify as a gay Muslim, that is a choice. That is something which would certainly be sinful because you're choosing to identify as a gay and a homosexual, even though you may not act on it. That is still haram. You can't go out and identify, I'm a gay Muslim, but by the way, I don't act on my impulses, but I'm going to publicly identify as such. That's problematic. So when I responded to Piers Morgan saying, yes, it's a choice, yes, it's a sin as a homosexual, which the textbook definition is feelings, impulses, and attraction, not necessarily relationship, that's what I meant. I meant that if you're going to identify as such and you're going to have a lifestyle according to such, then yes, it's sinful and it's a choice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what I was going to bring up. Let's continue watching, and then you can we'll go through that point, noting what you have already said about it.
Okay.
Per the argument, what is your view of this? You've run a lot of big schools.
What's happening outside the school is completely unacceptable. The intimidation of the head teacher and senior staff. This is an outstanding school which is doing incredibly well by all its students. It wouldn't have got that outstanding judgment if it didn't engage regularly with parents, and I'm sure it did. Ofsted has been in to look at the materials that they were using in their personal, social and health education lessons and found that the materials to be entirely appropriate.
Is it sexualised?
No, schools have got a job to do in the sort of society we are.
Here he's just begging the question. He's saying it's been evaluated and it's been deemed appropriate. Okay, appropriate according to what standard? So that's what's in question here, and you're just assuming it. So this is begging the question. It's a very basic logical fallacy.
What, Mike Wilshaw, yeah?
The pluralistic society.
Mike Wilshaw, Sir Mike Wilshaw, the former senior inspector of Ofsted, he got away with saying so much on that interview because my focus, sadly and incorrectly, was just on Piers Morgan. He got away with talking so much bakwas that that I should have pulled him up on. His whole thing about gay school pupils as young as 5, 6 are being bullied for being gay. Where did he get that statistic from? Like, how many gay pupils are there in school? Right?
Yeah.
He said something about. He said or he's going to say something about. Parents are being radicalized and it's a minority. No, it's not a minority. The vast, overwhelming majority of parents in Parkfield Community School have been protesting. It's not a minority. It's the overwhelming majority. And he said something about the Trojan horse scandal. Now, for your viewers outside of the UK, Trojan horse was it was an anonymous propaganda against a number of schools in Birmingham that had Muslim governors or were predominantly Muslim. They were graded outstanding, and then there was this anonymous letter that was given to the Department of Education, and there was like a 2-year witch hunt where schools that were previously graded excellent, right, were then deemed inadequate, governors were replaced, and there was this whole kind of Islamist plot to take over schools. Unsubstantiated lies, fabrications, investigations, independent investigations, and inquiries have proven that there was no such plot. Yet he had the audacity to sit there and mention it, and I gave him a free pass. May Allah forgive me for that. He should have been pulled up on that. As I mentioned, he got away with murder that day because I was too busy focused on Mr. Morgan.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue.
People have different views and different faiths and different lifestyles. Schools have got a job to prepare young people from the earliest age to go out into modern Britain and cope in modern Britain and meet people who are different to them, and above all to teach tolerance. And I've heard.
Oh yeah. So this goes back to the point of what do you count as different? Are you going to be teaching children about polygamous marriages? Are you going to be teaching children about all the different varieties of marriages that are considered to be contrary to liberal values? No, you're only teaching a very narrow spectrum of what is different and what should be tolerated. So this is all nonsense.
The argument this shouldn't happen in primary schools. Well, as a teacher of long experience and have been into many primary schools, you see children who are gay being bullied, and you hear that word gay being used in a pejorative way to bully others in school.
What age do kids go to mosques in this country?
I don't think there's a fixed age. I think children as young as 6, 7 or 8.
Right, so you're happy for them to go to mosques and hear teachings, which may include views about homosexuality in a mosque, you're not happy for them to have it at school.
I mean, parents have the right to withdraw their children from mosques and madrasas if they feel
But my
that.
point is, you're happy for them to hear it in a mosque, but you're not happy, and it would be a very negative, homophobic view.
Not necessarily. That's
It would be.
No,
There's no mosque in this country that's preaching tolerance or fairness about homosexuality, right?
I don't think that can be substantiated and be equated to
Well,
homophobia.
correct me if I'm wrong.
No, what's being taught...
Do mosques in this country,
Mosques
Muslim
and
country,
mosques
do
and
they teach
madrasas-
the virtues of homosexuality?
Mosques and madrasas...
What an idiot. What is he trying to prove? This is just so stupid. Okay, continue.
teach what is enshrined within scripture, and that is that marriage is a sanctimonious relationship and the only one that's correct according to the Islamic standpoint.
Between a man and woman.
Between a man and a woman in the sanctity of marriage.
Right. I mean, do you think gay people are born gay or do they become gay? What do you think? Is it a choice?
Please, with all due respect, I feel that we're digressing from the
No,
issue.
I'm curious in your answer.
I mean, I feel that we're digressing from the issue.
Is it a choice, being gay?
I mean, I feel it is a choice, yes.
Sure, people just decide to be gay.
I feel so, yes.
Really? You see, when you say that, the problem is most people in this country think that's a load of baloney, right? And we're supposed to be a tolerant, liberal country. We're not in Islamabad. Right? We're actually in...
Why is there this statement towards we're not in Islamabad? Well, that kind of language is very problematic in of itself.
Because saying the things you've just said would be
necessarily.
perfectly acceptable and would be widely held beliefs in Islamabad.
No.
But here in Britain, they are not acceptable.
Absolutely.
So I want to get your reaction to this racist kind of characterization, but
not kind of. It was racist. It was not kind of racist. It was racist.
yeah. So, but I mean, the thing is that how is he able to make these kinds of sweeping claims about what British people accept is acceptable or not? I think that again, like there's. What kind of statistics does he have? And furthermore, even if there is a majority who find that it's acceptable, what has changed? Why have things changed so quickly over a short period of time? Where 10 years ago, all politicians, it was bi-party consensus, at least in the US, liberal and conservative, that viewed same-sex marriage as something unacceptable. So what has changed? Well, it's partly because of programs like Good Morning America, who are repeating the same baseless claim that, oh, this is okay, this is acceptable, there's nothing wrong with it, we should embrace it, we should celebrate it. Look at all these TV shows and movies that have these kinds of gay characters and so forth. So they have played a part in normalizing it. So now your comment on Islamabad.
Piers Morgan was actually quoting Mike Wilshaw. Mike Wilshaw said that statement in BBC Radio 4. And Piers Morgan was merely repeating it. My feelings, it was a unsuccessful, sophisticated way of trying, basically calling me a Paki. That's essentially what it was, right? He's made a racial stereotype. He's made a racial assumption based on the parents who are protesting in Birmingham, knowing full well that majority of them are most likely Pakistani or from Pakistani origin. And he made that racial assumption and that stereotype. And basically, he's just saying, if you don't like it, go back to your country. Or go back to where we think you come from, right? My feelings, I don't want to basically say how I actually felt at the time when he said it.
Yeah, please no obscene language here, Dilly.
Yeah. And or what I felt like doing to him, but hey, I held back and I was just like, this is pathetic, this is ridiculous. But again, brothers and sisters, the fact that Piers Morgan, who is like the top 3 TV presenters in the UK, the only British journalist to have interviewed Donald Trump, for him to basically say that twice and get away with it casually. You know how he said to me, are you really saying that it's a choice with a straight face? He said it with a straight face. Just tells you what level we have got to in the UK. That you can literally say to a Muslim journalist who you've invited onto your show, that if you don't like it, go back to Islamabad. Or this isn't Islamabad. Trying to make out that it's only Pakistani Muslims that have come as well. Well, let me make it very abundantly clear. Arabs, Kurds, Africans, whites, blacks, Turks, all Muslims of all different colours, overwhelmingly, unequivocally opposed the no outsiders agenda and this whole pro-LGBT agenda. There's no two ways about it.
Not Muslims, non-Muslims as well. Many non-Muslims
Of course.
have been showing support for Muslims protesting. And saying that, look at the Muslims protesting this kind of indoctrination and they're standing up. Why aren't we doing it as well? So it's not just Muslims.
I had, yeah, of course. And the thing is, I was inundated with message of support from mainly Christians, but also Jewish members as well, Jewish people. And they basically just said, you know what, seeing Muslim parents in Birmingham, just seeing you guys with the backbone to discuss and oppose this publicly, you know, and they were cursing their leaders, they were cursing, because the Archbishop of this country, he supported the bill. The Archbishop of this country, of the UK, he supported this bill. He has no problem with RSC, yeah? The Church of England has, religious figures who identify as gay and lesbian and so forth, right? So I had loads of messages of support from Poland, from Eastern Europe, from Russia. I had Coptic Christians who somehow saw this clip and they were mashallah, they were so happy, right? And I think they know that those Christians and Jews who still hold on to traditional values and their kind of their scripture and try to live according to it, they're screwing. They're not happy at all that their faith leaders are not representing their sentiments. Right. But the sad reality is that the vast majority, and let's just say how it is, the vast majority of the two other Abrahamic faiths have secularized their religion. And that's been the case for the best part of 200-300 years. It's done and dusted. Even though you'll get conservative elements within the Christian and Jewish communities, you know, generally speaking, they've secularized their deen, they've secularized their religion. They don't feel it no longer has a real say in things that are taking place in the public life. And those Christians and Jews who have accepted that reality but dislike that reality have been supporting Muslims in the UK.
Right. Okay, so let's continue because I know. Do you still have time?
I have with you 18 minutes.
Okay, because I want to definitely talk about politics and some of the differences between the US and the UK when it comes to, for example, should Muslims support conservatives? At least in the US, that's relevant because you have Christian conservatives who oppose this kind of mandatory education. But let's continue real quick and then try to wrap up, inshallah, so you can go.
And they're actually homophobic.
No, they're not.
That's why I say it.
No, look, the issue here is, in the case of
Birmingham, and I think it's driving a lot of the protests.
The issue here in Birmingham, as espoused and articulated by the parents, is that there was a lack of communication.
Yes, I know, but underpinning it, yeah, and I'm not attacking your faith. I'm just saying that one of the bedrocks of being a Muslim, in terms of faith, is that,
as well as other faiths. I mean, let's not single out.
I get it. I'm not saying that.
Christians may feel the same way.
Absolutely. And Jewish communities.
I get it. But this whole thing of homosexuality being a sin, marriage between a man and a woman, so that does not reflect the more liberal way that this country has become.
Well, why is that?
And nor is it viewed as tolerant.
But why is that being conflated with an inability to coexist? Why is that being conflated?
You tell me, because it's these parents that are outside taking their kids out, shouting and screaming about it. And
when
I'm saying to you, I fear that underpinning it is basically homophobia.
The parents have consistently maintained that they have no issues with the Equalities Act, upon which the No Outsiders policy is based upon. But we forget that the Equalities Act 2010 stipulates 9 protected characteristics, one of which is religion and religious beliefs.
So Michael, we should...
Okay, so let's take a quick 5-minute break so that brother Dilly can go salli, inshallah, go pray, and then I'll just continue, and then you'll come back, right, Dilly?
Yes, give me a couple of minutes, inshallah.
Okay, yeah, go pray, and then I'll just keep talking on this issue and then related issues. If you haven't gone to muslimskeptic.com today, there's an article that I published that is kind of relevant to these issues. Let me bring it up just 1 second. Okay, this is on muslimgirl.com, which is a semi-prominent blog that has been publishing since it's been about 5 years, I think, 4 or 5 years. But I did an article on muslimgirl.com basically going through some of the very extremely anti-Islamic things that they are constantly promoting and pushing onto their readership. And what makes Muslim Girl so problematic and worthy of attention is the fact that you have more mainstream religious Muslim figures who will promote them, who will be affiliated with them. And so this is very troubling, because if Muslim Girl was just some random blog that had no connection with the Muslim community, that would be one thing. There's plenty of anti-Islamic material on the World Wide Web. But if you have a blog that's being promoted by prominent figures like Dalia Mugahed and others, and prominent organizations that are in our masajid, that are at our Islamic conventions, that are fundraising and taking money from donors, Muslim donors, on the basis of promoting Islam, promoting dawah. If you have those kinds of figures and organizations who are then promoting Muslim Girl, then this is a big, big problem, because it affects the faith of the Muslim community, and it gives the appearance that what Muslim Girl is promoting is religiously and Islamically legitimate, when in fact it is the exact opposite of that. So you can check out this article on muslimskeptic.com. Here I include lots of screenshots and examples of what Muslim Girl is promoting. Like, here is an article, did Allah give Muslims a definition for unlawful sex? Okay, so this is an article that's literally promoting zina and saying that there is no definition of unlawful sex in the Quran and the Sunnah. And it's just the scholars, these patriarchal scholars throughout Islamic history, who have imposed this kind of definition of sex prior to marriage or outside of marriage being unacceptable. So shocking things like this. Meet the founder of the Transgender Muslim Support Network. Okay, this is a trans woman, meaning, you know, a man dressed as a woman, that they're promoting. This Ramadan, I didn't shame myself for being queer. That's the title of another article about how you have to be loud and proud in Ramadan. Practicing Islam in short shorts. A very popular article. Here's what one Muslim girl has to say about casual sex. Okay, these are the kinds of things that are being promoted. Why are we hiding our periods during Ramadan? Okay, testing the gag reflex with these kinds of images. Why gay imams are better for Muslim women. Okay, is this a parody? Is this supposed to be a joke? No, they're dead serious. This is what they're promoting. It's time to accept Muslim denominationalism. Basically, Muslims need to follow the path of Jews and Christians and create denominations. Ever wonder what Muslim girl's zodiac sign is? Zodiac, this is shirk, basically, trying to gain knowledge about who you are from the stars. The divine is within you. Taking off my hijab was a slow transition. Tweeting, check out our very own social media editor and the realities of dating as a modern Muslim woman. Fire emoji, heart emoji, and so forth. So this is what Muslim Girl is all about. They even had a scholarship, Rainbow Crescent Scholarship, for Muslim students who identify as LGBT. They're giving money for a student. So this is, shockingly brazen. This is very brazen stuff. In the UK, you have brothers like Dilly who are going and speaking truth, and they're putting, the haqq before the non-Muslim society that they're living in, protesting schools and curricula. In the US, we have Muslim Girl, and then we have figures like Dalia Mugahed, Linda Sarsour, others who are promoting things like this, who are promoting these kinds of organizations. Muslim Girl, who is trying to push LGBT, providing scholarships, pushing zina, pushing all of this fahisha. So this is what we have to deal with in the U.S., and that shows you the distinction between these two communities, which I think is very relevant. So Dilly, you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, so I was just giving a rundown of an article that I published recently on MuslimSkeptic.com, so check it out. Let's go back to the program and continue the analysis.
I mean, this is where there is conflict, isn't there? Because we want to live in a liberal society where we respect people's different opinions, but we also need to respect people's different faiths. And if that faith thinks that something is intolerable, how do we accommodate that?
Well, the same would apply to the Jewish faith, to Christians, to Catholics in Catholic schools. I was head of a Catholic school at one time. I would not have done what these parents are demanding that I do, not teach about tolerance and equality of people who have different views to my own. And that's the issue. And these parents are being whipped up, I'm absolutely sure, because I worked in Birmingham on the Trojan Horse affair some years ago. They're being whipped up by a small group of radicals who are determined to get their way. And it's up to the school and the schools involved and the Department of Education and the local authority to stand up against these parents.
Let's take religion out of it. Children as young as 5 learning about different relationships. Some parents, regardless of religion, might actually think, I just think it's too young. I just think it's too young for these children to even be thinking about that. It's absolutely fair enough that some people have gay parents, some people have single parents, some people are in care. It's absolutely fair enough. But I just want my child to go along and play in the playground and learn something.
Okay, that's up to the school to make that decision as to what age they start teaching relationship education. It's not sex education, it's relationships education, and it's going to be on the statute book from next year, and all primary schools are going to have to get involved in this. It's really up to the school to decide how and when they do it, and whether the materials are right. And Ofsted has been in and looked at it and said it's entirely appropriate.
Is it not better to absolutely keep the parents on board at all stages?
It is, but I come back to that point I made earlier. I have seen the most terrible, vicious bullying of gay people in school, and that word gay being used as a...
Where is this bullying? Right? I'm not familiar with... I went through to grade school, public school in the U.S., and there wasn't any bullying that I could tell, because, like you mentioned earlier, it's such a small percentage of the population, and it wasn't happening back in those days when it wasn't even something normalized. It wasn't even something being promoted. But now there's...
It's one of those things which Wilshaw got away with, right? I was thinking, and even whilst you were saying, I was thinking, how many gay primary school pupils are there? If there's any kind of discrimination you need to be highlighting, Mr. Wilshaw, it's the amount of Muslims that are being called muzzies and pakis in playgrounds, are being beaten up, are being ganged up upon, are being, if you put it as a list of priorities, right? Racism, Islamophobia, obesity, there's so many other different categories of that genuinely, in their hundreds, if not thousands, of children are being bullied, are committing suicide. How many gay pupils? And then I was so flabbergasted with the nonsense that he was saying that I couldn't even really articulate a response. I thought to myself, how many primary school pupils, and by the way, primary school pupils, brothers and sisters, is like 5 to 11, right? How many primary school people openly identify as gay? I'm interested to know, it's crazy. And the way he said it was as if this issue was an endemic. It was widespread, that it's happening across the country. As I mentioned, brothers and sisters, that whilst my focus was on Piers Morgan, Wilshaw got away with saying so much, which I should have countered, and that was one of the nonsense that he came out with.
There was an article. There's an article that I wrote recently on the news that a major article, research paper on this issue of bullying, LGBT bullying, and how the bullying leads to suicide, it leads to a lower life expectancy. This was a major research paper that people would cite to prove that, okay, religious attitudes against same-sex behavior, against transgenderism, has this harm to people committing suicide, having a lower life expectancy. That paper was retracted recently. It was shown to be completely fallacious based on major methodological errors. And so that was news that wasn't really promoted. It was kind of quietly retracted and no one really mentioned. So this idea of bullying leading to these kinds of harms, where's the data that shows that? And even if you can prove it, even if you can prove that there is such a negative consequence to quote-unquote bullying, first of all, why is it bullying to say that something is morally wrong? Why is that bullying? That you're just expressing a moral position. If you say that, for example, adultery is wrong, that could cause people who engaged in adulterous behavior to feel depressed, to feel ashamed of themselves, to feel like they've done something wrong, and so they avoid that. And it could even lead some of them to commit suicide. But does that mean that we teach people that's okay to engage in adultery, to cheat on your husband, to cheat on your wife? Are we going to change the morality just because it causes shame or it causes some people to feel bad about that kind of behavior? No. So the entire argument is fallacious.
He said, the word gay is used in such a discriminatory way. Look, man, young boys, Muslim, non-Muslim, of all different colors, we know when we're young kids, and I'll say it openly, when you're young kids and you're messing about with the lads, you'll say, yeah, bruv, you're gay. Oh, mate, you're gay. Stop being gay. Stop being... It's actually part of the lingo in the United Kingdom. And I know any Muslim, any non-Muslim male that's watching this knows that if you've had friends and you've messed about with friends and you're kidding about, calling each other gay was a kind of a pee-take, right?
So that's still happening? That word is still being used in the UK amongst the bros or the bruvs?
I think there's harsher versions of it now. There's more
because I have a funny story because when I was growing up in high school, I mean, this was also a term, like you can describe something as gay, this is gay or whatever. But I made the mistake. So when I went to college, it was a pretty liberal college, Harvard, and the student, I described it in kind of described something in that kind of way. Oh, that's gay, and thinking that, oh, well, this is just the lingo, as you said. And this was over 10 years ago. The other students, it was just like at a dining hall on campus, and I said, oh, this is gay, right, as a pejorative kind of thing. And then the other students who were in earshot turned to me with such anger and such malice, like, look at this barbarian, look at this retrograde person. And that was a really quick lesson for me that, okay, I was a freshman at the time. Looks like I can't be using language like this anymore.
Well, hold on. But you see the madness about that is, I mean, I had white non-Muslim friends in University of East Anglia, which was, again, a very upper middle class kind of demographic. And they used to say, oh, Dilly, stop being so gay. And, you need to stop all this nonsense because, okay, even when you use the B word, if you call someone a bastard, that doesn't necessarily mean you're having an attack at relationships at a wedlock. It's become a term which people use, right? And so even when Mr. Wilshaw said that gay is used in a particular way in playground, no, it's being used how kids use it. Because they've grown up using that word to basically take the mick out of someone else.
Right. So again, it's question begging. You have to start from the assumption that this is something perfectly acceptable and normal, like being acting on same-sex desires, sodomizing someone else, etc. You have to come with the assumption that that's perfectly acceptable to then condemn using those terms in a pejorative way. But that's exactly what's in question. The morality of the issue is what's in question, and they're imposing a certain kind of moral conception on Muslims, and now they're trying to do it in our schools as well. So, I mean, this is, yeah, go ahead.
Let me tell you something. You know what? You know the 24 hours, 36 hours after that interview, because, you know, GMB shows go viral, right? The amount of nonsense I had to hear from the pro-LGBT community on Twitter was crazy, right? You know, it was basically a case like this. Look, I believe same-sex relations and relationships outside of wedlock, and those who gamble, those who drink alcohol, those who commit zina, those who lie, those who take riba, all of these are major sins. They're abominations. They're a crime against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Those who commit shirk.
Pardon?
Those who commit shirk and kufr.
Yeah, all of these things are major, major sins. From my worldview, from my philosophical and moral standpoint. However, if you happen to be a non-Muslim that believes in those things, and you are not inciting violence or hatred against me, right? You and I, in essence, can coexist in society, like we have to. I've got, right now, on one side of my neighbours, I've got 7 Lithuanians who love drinking, knocking their beer. They have girlfriends, which from my moral conceptual point of view, they're committing zina, right? On my other side, I have other neighbours who are non-Muslims. The thing is, when I leave my home, I tell them I'm leaving home, keep an eye on my house. And they do the same with me, right? When I have food for Ramadan, I always tell my missus, make sure a plate goes to them and a plate goes to them. But you know, the pro-LGBT community, if you just go onto Dilly, Hussain, 88 on Twitter and look at some of the conversations I've been having, apparently you're a homophobic bigot and an extremist to immediately have a moral standpoint to say what you're doing is sinful. Quite frankly, what's it to you if you think you're going to burn in hellfire for eternity? You don't even believe in a God. You don't even believe in my God or my scripture. Why is it so offensive to you that I believe that you're going to go hellfire or you may be punished for the actions that you're engaging in? In the same way that I'm not offended when my Christian friends have a certain beliefs about those who don't believe in the Trinity, who don't believe that Isa alayhi salam wrongly, according to them, took the sin for whole of mankind. I know exactly what they think of me and where my eternity lies according to their creed. We're still friends, we're still brethren, we still get along, it's not a problem. But the pro-LGBT community and their muscular approach, literally it's a muscular approach. You're homophobic, you're extremist, you should be banned, you should be censored, you should be gagged, your schools should be watched. All this nonsense, it shows how intellectually fragile this argument is, right?
Right.
And
it shows how it's not a neutral playing field, that secularism is not this kind of allowing all religions to live peacefully amongst each other. I agree. I think that Muslims and non-Muslims can live together peacefully, and we've been doing it. I was born and raised in the United States. So there's not an issue there. But what is being imposed, what aspects of our religion are being curtailed? So within the certain European countries, you have hijab is being banned. Minarets were banned in Switzerland, the building of minarets. Halal meat, yes. Circumcision was banned. All of these bans are, by the way, are coming on the basis of arguing that there's a public interest that is being violated by Islamic practice. And even within so Netherlands, you have Geert Wilders, right? And what's his argument? His argument says that, well, we ban Mein Kampf, we ban Holocaust denial, we ban all of these different anti-Semitic expressions and so forth because we don't want another Holocaust to happen. We don't want millions of people to be gassed like they were in the past, as they claim. And so for the same reason, we have to ban the Quran. We have to ban certain Muslim practices. We have to highly regulate mosques or even ban mosques because there's a public interest. In the Quran, we have we have this kind of sentiment against other religions. We have denunciations in the Quran of other gods. And so this is intolerant. And that's the reason for banning the Quran, banning mosques, banning Muslims, and so on and so forth. So he's making a completely secular argument, because he's just appealing to harm. He's just appealing to public interest. But we can see that Muslims, if we play this game, it's going to get very ugly very fast.
I think it's also important to add, Daniel, is that from my research, from my understanding, all of this, whether it's the pro-LGBT agenda, whether it's shutting down and prohibiting and criminalizing certain Islamic rituals and beliefs, it all falls as part of a global agenda against Islamic revival. That's my view, right? Sometimes I've been advised by certain elders who I make shura with before I make public engagement that, try avoiding this kind of us and them mentality and this kind of Manichean worldview. The thing is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our beloved Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam have already presented that this world and this life will be one between a camp of haqq and batil and iman and kufr, right? So when we know this, we know that there will come a time, and it's been here since the dawn of Islam. From the dawn of Islam, from the very moment that our beloved Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came to the message of Islam, and from Medina onward, it has always been a Manichean worldview. So quite frankly, it's part of a global ideological war against Islam, because quite frankly, it's the only worldview that essentially offers humanity and mankind an alternative to the capitalistic way of life that has currently been destroying the world that we've known for the best 200-300 years. It's the fact that Islam and Muslims, our beliefs, our creed, is seen from the prism of an existential threat. Now, I posit this: is an existential threat to something that is destructive as capitalism and secular liberalism, is Islam posing an existential threat essentially a bad thing? If it's offering you an alternative, if it's merely offering an alternative way of life, I don't think this existential threat is essentially a bad thing. So we need to be quite unequivocal and very open about it. Now, these things are not happening in a vacuum. It's not happening in isolation. It falls as part of a wider global agenda of ideological Islamophobia, neo-imperialism and colonialism in the Muslim majority world. All these things that you're seeing that are being banned in European countries is intrinsically linked to the wars, the invasions, the occupations, the supporting of despotic regimes. It's all interlinked. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, do not see it as things which are separate. They're not. It's all interlinked. Western secular thinkers and academics and research and think tanks, they tell you this. Rand Corporation and these guys, Henry Jackson Society in the UK, and all these non-Muslim, neoconservative, hawkish things that they're telling you. And the reason why we go and do these things is because we see Islam, right, as an ideological threat. And remember this, they're not talking about ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. They're not talking about these groups. That's another, false equivalence.
They're talking about Dilly.
Yeah, they're talking about Dilly and Haqiqatjou. They're talking about some of the people which our brother Dilly and Haqiqatjou debates with passionately and gets spoken about, who are from different ideological backgrounds. They're talking about all of us. They're not talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram. They're talking about mainstream, normative, orthodox Islam. And all these things that you are seeing is part of a wider agenda. If you YouTube, Dan, I'm just going to plug. If you Google the origins of Islamophobia, it's a lecture that I delivered at Middlesex University. And what is Islamophobia? A lecture I delivered at University of Sheffield. I discussed these things. Don't look at these things in isolation. They don't happen in a vacuum, right? Even the destruction of the Uthmani Khilafah, which happened in 3rd of March 1924, that was just a symptomatic outcome of what was already in play for centuries, right? So whilst as Muslims living in the West, we shouldn't see our neighbors and we shouldn't see our colleagues and our peers, or if you're a convert, your family members as us and them, and you hit no, we will coexist, we will give dawah, we will enjoy in good and forbid evil, we will do what we have to do to survive, yeah? But know that everything that you're seeing is part of a wider global agenda. This has been testified by Obama, by Blair, by Bush, by Cameron, by their own think tanks. They're telling you that this is not in isolation. We support regimes in the Muslim world because of a particular reason. We criminalize certain movements and groups for a particular reason. So The banning of the minaret, the banning of halal meat, the banning of circumcision, the pro-LGBT agenda, all of this stuff is interlinked to things that are happening in the Muslim world.
So let's now talk about, well, what has the Muslim reaction been? So we know about the protesting by some. Tell me more about how there was no MP that voted against this, no member of parliament that voted against this kind of curriculum. Tell me about what implication that has for the political sphere within the UK and how Muslims are thinking about politics. Because in the US, there's so much support for figures like Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, the congresswomen. Before them, Keith Ellison. Even though these figures are compromising on many aspects of religion, they're promoting LGBT. In some instances, they even compromise on the issue of Palestine, on Palestine. Yet, we're told within the American Muslim community that we must vote, and we must vote Democrat. We must vote for these figures, despite the fact that they are promoting these anti-Islamic views. So what's the dynamic like in the UK? Are there any differences in that regard?
No, generally speaking, this whole kind of pragmatic argument which you've just mentioned is exactly the same in the UK. I think, sadly, all around the world, it's not just in the West, all around, even in the Muslim world, right? Whether you're in Pakistan and you have PPP and TPI or PTI, and all, or in Bangladesh you have BNP and Awami League and all these different parties, the very fact that Muslims have restricted themselves into the dominant status quo politics of the ballot box shows that, from my point of view and from my reading and research, that, you know, we're not really, real true radical change will not come from the ballot box, brothers and sisters. Historically, it never has come from the ballot box. It never has. True radical change, right? And when I say radically, I'm not talking about rebellion and uprisings. I'm talking about actual change of a community's circumstances and reality has always happened outside of the ballot box.
Non-violent. For anyone listening from the FBI or
yeah, of course. I mean, okay,
non-violent.
The FBI, let's just give you some examples. Whether it's even the feminist movement of the UK, the apartheid movement of South Africa, Gandhi's movement of independence. You know, I can cite the Black Civil Rights movement. You know, most of these things were done outside the ballot box, because the ballot box is essentially, you know, a very conformist type of politics. You know, we've heard it here. If you strategically vote Labour, if you strategically vote in this constituency where there's a high Muslim demographic, we can get the Muslim MPs. Let me tell you something. The Muslim politicians, right? I'm not going to speak on behalf of the United States because I don't know much about some of the individuals that you mentioned. But I'm going to assume that they're not that different to the Muslim MPs that we have here. The Muslim MPs that we have in the UK and I've always had in the UK are career politicians. Now, to be a career politician, you cannot criticize the Israeli entity. And if you do, or you find some previous tweets or FB posts, you're going to be made to apologize and probably go through some anti-Semitism hate course or something, right? You cannot now speak out against pro-LGBT and same-sex relations. In 2013, the vast majority of Muslim MPs either abstained or voted in support of same-sex relations bill. How they will answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Qiyamah, that's between them. But I wouldn't want to be in that position. Not a single Muslim MP, Christian MPs, couple of Hindu MPs, they voted against the relationship and sex education bill that's going to be passed. Not a single Muslim MP voted against it. So what you will find is that Muslim politicians are career politicians. They are seeking a career in politics.
So what would you say, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, what would you say to those who will argue that if Muslims do not vote, if Muslims do not have this kind of political participation, then they're irrelevant to society and they are going to be, right? So what would you say to that?
No, I'll say to the conscience of the UK and those of you who are watching from the UK and those of you who are my dear brothers and sisters whom I love for the sake of Allah, and we have those differences when it comes to election time, you know that voting apathy and the low turnout of the electorate is a testimony to the fact that this this whole lack of belief and trust in the political system is not something that is just restricted and exclusive to the Muslims. There are millions upon millions of non-Muslims who do not believe in the existing political system. They don't believe that the politicians represent their views and their sentiments, right? So let me tell you this. If for the last 18, 19 years, especially in the dawn of the war on terror, and since the heightened Islamophobic climate that we live in, what have we seen? We've seen more laws, more legislation, more brazen and emboldened Islamophobic rhetoric from both sides of the political spectrum. If that's what your strategic voting has got you, then carry on. We'll have this conversation again in 5-10 years' time. When Islamophobia has got worse, it's not got better. It's not got better with more Muslim MPs. It's not got better with a Muslim mayor of London, who, by the way, was at the front line of the Pride Parade. Yeah?
Right. Yeah, I think that the point you're making is that there are such larger dynamics.
Just on this point. I just want to conclude on this point. I would rather have non-Muslim MPs who will convey my thoughts and my grievances and my beliefs as part of their constituents than a Muslim MP who knows that they cannot say certain things, who know that if they say certain things, their careers are finished. Quite frankly, if we're going to have Muslim MPs like that, you're better off not having Muslim MPs. What's the point? What is the point? If they're going to compromise on Philippines, they're going to compromise on wars, they're going to compromise on Islamophobia, they're going to compromise on things that are in scripture. Allah and His Messenger they've ordained these things to be haram in their essence. That you're going to remain neutral or vote in support of it. Why? If you think that strategically and pragmatically and that by entering because there's an entire movement, many sincere Muslim brothers and sisters and ulama who are part of this movement that believe that pragmatism and entryism and entering these positions of power and then somehow, swaying certain legislations and trying to influence things bit by bit by bit. I ask you this question. Where were we when you had this belief, and where are we today in 2019? Have things really got better with Muslim MPs and congresswomen and congress people? I leave that to you to think about sincerely and objectively.
Right. So I think that's a very powerful message. There are these bigger forces that are at play. When you're mentioning colonialism, when you're mentioning imperialism, when you even go as far back as Napoleon Bonaparte, it's clear that we're talking about larger historical and civilizational forces that are not really going to be changed at the ballot box with, a midterm election
It's a world order. It's a world order. Let's not fraff about it. Let's not get all arrivals about it, because I know this is not a conspiracy, brothers and sisters. Yeah, there is a global world order, a structure, an institution, the United Nations, NATO, Universal Human Rights, the Arab League, the OIC, the IMF, the World Bank. All of these things are structures of power. Structures of power which, quite frankly, do not want to see an Islamic world order. They don't want to see. They don't want to see an Islamic alternative to their way of life. They fought centuries to get to where they are. Right? They're not going to just let Muslimics come along and then all of a sudden establish what they want to establish. It's not going to happen. And this is one of our struggles. Do not be bystanders. Do not be witnesses. I've always said this, Daniel. I've said this in a number of podcasts before and in my lectures. We are living in a unique time in history, that when future generations look back to this period, they're going to talk about us and say, subhanallah, that was a crazy time to be a Muslim. If it was a crazy time to be a Muslim, that means it's the most special time to gain ajr, brothers and sisters. Do not be witnesses. Do not be bystanders. Contribute towards the change. And even my brothers and sisters and respected ulama and activists who are from that school of thought that believe engagement, voting, I love you for the sake of Allah. And I know that our grievances and our objectives may be the same. But even then, we have to think outside of the ballot box. You have to think outside the ballot box.
So give examples. Give examples about what does it mean to think outside the ballot box? Would you have practical suggestions and tips for us?
If we believe in the Quranic and the prophetic injunctions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised us as the best nation from amongst mankind because we enjoin good and forbid evil and believe in Allah. If we believe what Allah says in Surah Al-Fusilat, that who is better than the one who invites to Allah, does good and says, I am one of the Muslims. If we believe that Prophet ﷺ said that we we try to change a munkar with our hands and speak out against it, and the worst form or the lowest form of iman shahid. If we know all of these things, then we know that we can do a lot more than just voting and put an X on a box. We need to be building strategic relationships. Intra-Muslim strategic relationships. We need to be unified. We need to put our sectarian and partisan differences aside and be unified on common causes, things which transcend our sectarian and partisan differences. We need to make strategic relationships with other non-Muslim groups based on our values and principles. We need to make relationships where we are not compromised. We need to stop hiding behind other groups. We need to take a lead. We need to get out of this culture of fear. We may even have to resort to civil disobedience if it has to be done. Within peaceful ways, protest, demonstrate, petitions, lobby, do all of these things. There's so many things that you can do. Fund your Muslim institutions. Dig deep. In the same way that you dig deep when there's a calamity in the Muslim world, fund your think tanks, fund your Muslim institutions. And if you feel that these institutions do not represent your views and your sentiments and your grievances, then help set up new ones. Right? There's so many things that you can do beyond the ballot box.
Right. It's not that these organizations don't represent your views, because who knows, maybe your views are wrong. If they're not representing Islam, if they're not teaching authentic Islam, Orthodox Islam. So just to add to, I think these are very excellent, mashallah, points. One of the commenters is saying, mashallah, Dilly is going in. He's not holding back, mashallah. This is great. But just to add to your fire and some of the points that you're bringing, is I think a very practical thing that Muslims can do is build strong families, build strong marriages, right? And there's an attack from liberal secular society, from feminism, attacking our marriages and basically disabusing our Muslim brothers and sisters on the importance of gender roles and the position of the husband, the position of the wife. How do these two parties within a marriage complement each other in their specific roles as defined by Allah and within the Quran and Sunnah? So there's a reason why we have these kinds of roles through revelation, because Allah wants us to flourish. Allah wants humankind to proliferate and to live in the best way in the dunya and to achieve bliss in the akhirah. Huh? Yeah, Allah, and the Prophet ﷺ says that He'll be proud of our numbers. So are we having children? And it's very ironic to me that the white nationalists, those who are so hateful of Muslims, recognize that one thing that Muslims have got right is family values, having children, and having many children, and having these kinds of strong traditional marriages and families. So they are envious of us because of this, but we're throwing it out. We're throwing it away.
Even with the elements of the Christian right and the right wing who believe this, they acknowledge these correct things about Islam and Muslim, but at the same time they want to exterminate us, which is crazy. But anyway, I want to make another very important point, and it's one that I really wanted to make. There's a number of organizations, Muslim organizations that are out there that are doing fantastic work in the field of da'wah, inviting non-Muslims to Islam and community engagement. And then there's also a number of Muslim organizations who are doing great work in the field of activism. Brothers and sisters, activism and da'wah are not two separate things. If you believe inviting people to Islam and enjoining good and forbidding evil and standing up against injustice and oppression, then you have secularized your deen. Wallahi, you have. Activism and da'wah are the same thing. Why? Because every single prophet that Allah sent on this earth, besides inviting them to Tawheed and worshipping Allah alone, associating no partners with Him, they enjoined good and forbid evil. They addressed every social problem that they did. Why? Because one of the emanations, one of the outcomes of Tawheed and Islamic monotheism is that you will stand against injustice and oppression and wrongdoing and tyranny and these kind of things. Activism and da'wah are not two separate things. They are one of the same thing. So please, brothers and sisters who are engaged in da'wah but are not engaged in activism, or engaged in activism and not engaged in da'wah, they're the two same things. They need to be done together.
But you have to define activism, because in the US the activists are the ones who are promoting feminism, they're promoting LGBT, so they will say that we don't.
well, let me define to you what activism from an Islamic perspective is, and it's something which I believe has been echoed by a number of respected ulama and activists, both in the States, like Dr. Shadi al-Masri, Brother Abdullah Andalusi, Hamza Zolsis, yourselves, and many, Sheikh Haytham al-Haddad, many others, Sheikh Zahir Mahmoud, Sheikh Asrar Rashid, many others, there's many. Islamic activism is based on the premise that we as Muslims have been raised from Allah, we have been given that izzah as the best nation from amongst mankind. Why? There's a caveat to that. There's a condition. Why? Because we enjoin in what's good and we forbid what's evil, and we do it because we believe in Allah. Not because of PR, not because we want to humanize Muslims and humanize Islam. No, we do it because we believe in Allah. Allah says in Surah Al-Fusilat, He says, who is better than the one who invites to Allah, does good and says, I am of the Muslims? So when you engage in activism, number one, you're not selectively choosing what you think is good and what you think is bad. You don't get to define what is good and bad. Allah and His Messenger define what is good and bad. And you enjoin and good and forbid evil according to that. When our beloved Prophet ﷺ was asked by the companion, what is the best form of jihad? He ﷺ responded, it's a word of truth to tyrannical ruler. You don't get to choose which tyranny you get to speak out against. You speak out against all tyranny. You don't get to speak out against Sisi or Bashar, but you stay quiet when it comes to Obama's tyranny. It don't work like that. It don't work like that. Woke activism doesn't work like that, brothers and sisters. You have to remain consistent. You have to be comprehensive. And we have the guidance. We have the guidance in the Quran and the Sunnah and that the companions, that we know that when we enjoin, and Allah says it, that are you a people who take some aspects of the book and was rejecting others? Is our activism really going to be shaped by making halal haram and haram halal? If that's the kind of activism, that's not activism. Stay far away from that activism. But activism, Islamic activism, is something which is consistent, which is comprehensive, which is grounded in normative orthodox Islam, which has the consultation of people of knowledge, and it's not something which is done in a vacuum, and it's not something which we do in a compromised manner. In the same way, those brothers and sisters who give da'wah as part of the organizations, who are on salaries giving da'wah as part of da'wah organizations, you can carry on talking about love, mercy, and compassion, and you are right. Ultimately, Allah's attributes, His love, His mercy, His compassion, it has been noted that His love and compassion, mercy is greater than the other attributes. Khair, I get that. But you cannot convey the message of Islam whilst constantly talking about love, mercy, compassion, and essentially Christianizing our da'wah. It doesn't work like that.
So is this a problem in the UK? Because it's a problem in the US, where we have activists who are saying, it's just activists and some of their activist-oriented imams who will say things like, well, we have to be compassionate, we have to be merciful, we don't want to push people away from Islam, we don't want to alienate people from Islam, therefore we have to have this kind of soft approach, and they try to justify it. The way I tell them is that, yes, soft approach in interpersonal reaction. If there's someone weak Muslim who is... Yeah, if there's some weak Muslim in front of me who wants to learn, I'm not going to blast that person. I'm not going to tell them, get in line, what is this? No, but there's that context, and then there's public preaching and putting out material, putting out videos that is going to affect the tenor of people's understanding of Islam. And if you are cherry picking and you are sugarcoating and you're giving this cotton candy Islam, and you're on this kind of justification that this is not we have to be compassionate and so forth, then you're driving people away from Islam. You're driving people away in the sense that they might identify as Muslim in a kind of a cultural way, but are they identifying in the sense that they accept what is in the book, they accept what is in the Sunnah, they are fully Muslim in their acceptance of these important aspects of Islam? Are they enjoining good and forbidding evil and all these things that you are mentioning? No. So it's just a cultural type of Islam that they're practicing. If some of these younger Muslims, let me tell you about the U.S. In the U.S., some of the youth here, okay, they have no conception of Islam having a problem with same-sex behavior. They have no conception. And if you tell them this, I'm not talking about like little children, I'm talking about college age. If you tell them that, look, in Islam, this is something that is an abomination, and in fact, Allah has destroyed an entire civilization, Qawm Lut, because of this kind of behavior, or an entire city because of this type of behavior, they're completely ignorant of that, and they'll be shocked, and they'll be scandalized, and they will attack you. They'll attack you for being a hate preacher. They'll attack you for being...
Alhamdulillah, that's not the case in the UK. It hasn't got to that point.
Right. No, I have experience. I have experience where...
protect our youth and our generation from getting to that stage. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, it's that's the state, unfortunately, of many in the U.S. context, especially amongst the youth in the colleges. I was at a college giving a lecture, and in the Q&A, someone asked about LGBT, and I gave a very, even-keeled response. I wasn't blasting anyone. I wasn't using any kind of, language that could be seen as pejorative. I was just giving the standard Sunni view of this. It's not even a Sunni view. Every sect of Islam has this orthodox position on same-sex behavior. And I just expressed it very plainly. And then there was a whole controversy at that university in amongst the MSA with the chaplain. The chaplain basically sent a message to the student saying that this speaker's view that we invited, his views on this issue aren't representative of what we believe, etc. and so forth. So this is the kind of situation that we have in the US, and I'm happy to hear that in the UK it hasn't gotten so dire.
It's not. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Myself and others, we visit universities and Islamic societies up and down the country, and they're nowhere next to that.
Yeah, and in the US there was one MSA that wanted to have, I don't know if the Islamic societies in the UK have like Islam Awareness Week or Islam Appreciation Week. In the US, there was one school, one MSA that wanted to have Queer Muslim Appreciation Week. Just a whole week on gay Muslims. And this was something that, this wasn't even this year, this was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that madness hasn't arrived in our shores yet. And rest assured that whilst I and many others are alive, it's not going to get an easy ride here, inshallah. Yeah. With regards to the whole kind of love, mercy, compassion approach, look, on an interpersonal level, as you mentioned, when you're speaking to a non-Muslim on a dawah stall, when you're speaking to your non-Muslim neighbor, I want to give a shout out to my neighbor Aurelius, a Lithuanian who loves drinking beer. He says it to me all the time. One time he asked me, Dilly, do you believe you believe you chop hands? You believe this? I said, Aurelius, when you're sober, my friend, come see me. Yeah? Because it's true, I can't engage with him on that level. I said, look, I will have an answer for you. Just come see me. Promise me you'll come see me when you're sober. When we had a conversation the next day, I explained to him the Islamic penal code, the underlying paradigm and framework, the objective of the penal code within Islam. He understood it. Because I understand, but I disagree. But I understand why. Yeah? But when I explained to him about capital punishment for certain crimes, he was fully supportive of that. So the thing is, I'm just saying that when you have these interpersonal relationships and discussions and dialogue, of course, love, mercy, compassion needs to be applied. But let's remember something as well. Many of the Anbiya, peace be upon them all, especially our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they had different ways in which they engage with different people. With the leaders of Quraysh, the beloved Prophet was harsh. He cursed some of them. He cursed them. He accused them as harsh. But with the Bedouin, he spoke to people according to their level and their status, right? So if you want to apply love, compassion, and mercy in your dawah, do it proportionally and do it in a manner in which is appropriate, right? Love, compassion, and mercy does not apply to a political party or to an organization or to an individual who's calling for the slaughter of Muslims.
Or an ideology that is calling for the dissolution of Islam.
As for your non-Muslim neighbor or colleague, or the non-Muslim who approaches you in a dawah stall, of course, you're not going to start talking about Jahannam straight away. Of course not. I get that. But it's not all love, mercy, compassion throughout. The prophets did warn of hellfire. The prophets did warn about punishment. Allah Himself in the Quran, for those of you who love Nu'man Ali Khan, and you talk about the way Allah pairs certain words in the Quran, day and night, man and woman, reward and punishment, hell and heaven, good and bad. Yeah? So let's not intentionally negate certain aspects of da'wah, right? Whilst dressing it up as all love, mercy, and compassion, and essentially you're just Christianizing out your faith. I know you may not intend to do that, and I know that we all have complexes at a very difficult environment where we're targeted, we're criminalized, we're demonized, we're seen as a fifth column, we're seen as a suspect community. I understand with all this immense pressure and with all these complexes that we have in our mind, it's very easy to just do these things. Brothers and sisters who are engaged in da'wah, especially those who do it for a career, who do it as a day job, please be proportionate, be balanced in how you convey the message of Islam. Yes, love, mercy, and compassion when it's applicable. And when you need to stand for justice in a forthright and uncompromising manner against those who want to oppress us and kill us, be proportional and balanced. Do not be either or.
Yeah,
please.
Jazakallah khairah for that message. You know, I agree with you 100%. In the UK, I don't know what the situation is. Unfortunately, in the US, we have certain what I call faux traditionalists, you know, fake traditionalists, pseudo traditionalists who are claiming that the Islamic tradition is all about peace, love, and mercy. And I mean, they'll respond to some of your points, for example, by saying that, well, yeah, harshness with maybe the non-Muslims, but at least among Muslims, we have to be very peaceful and loving, and we shouldn't call things out. But this is also a complete distortion of the tradition. Many of the ulama were engaged with refuting deviance, zanadiqa, the deviant, mulhidun, calling those individuals out and those ideologies out, and those schools of thought out. Look at Imam Ghazali, look at Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. Look at many of the scholars, Al-Razi, who are engaged in critiquing and sometimes very harshly the ideologies that they viewed, rightly so, as deviance creeping in to Muslim belief. And so they were not pulling any punches. They were not being soft and compassionate. Oh, we have to be wise and have hikmah and all of this. No, they were addressing the issue in a very clear-cut way, and even using names like, these are deviants, this is a zindiq, this is so on and so forth. So we have lost that. We are just sanitizing and whitewashing our own tradition, our scholarly tradition, the Quran and Sunnah, because we have this kind of confused understanding of what those things are.
I think one of the things which, whether people admit it or not, whether people of knowledge choose to admit this or not, the reason why we've got an entire, I don't like using this word, clergy, even though there is no such concept of clergy in Islam, but what's happening is that we've got a post-colonial clergy who can be of different theological spectrums, by the way. It's not specific to any school of thought or any madhab. You find ulama, sadly, from different schools who have no problem legitimizing and normalizing oppression, who have no problems perpetuating the onslaught against Islam and Muslims, whilst believing this whole kind of hikmah approach, not rebelling or speaking out against rulers' approach. Look, the issue here is, it goes back to a point that I made earlier in the podcast. We are living in a unique time, in a period in Islamic history, or in history period, where Islam and Muslims has never found itself in the position that we find ourselves in today, brothers and sisters. Right? For the best part of 1,000 years, and I'm not here to romanticize Islamic history. Islamic history is not romanticized. There were many issues that we had, many issues we had in our history, right? But for the best part of 1,000 years, the way in which many look up to the United States of America, Britain and France, and the West generally from a civilizational perspective, the Islamic civilization was that for over 1,000 years, right? We were those who led humanity in nearly every aspect of life. People thought twice, other civilizations thought twice before they did and said things to Muslims, even at times where we were disunified and we had wars between ourselves. But the last century and century and a half is something which has never been the case. Even with the Mongol invasion and sacking of Baghdad, it was never like what we're living in today, where there's been an entire shift of balance of power, where there is no balance, there is no Islamic balance of power. We have 57 Muslim majority secular nation states who are enslaved to other powers, and therefore the kind of level of scholarship that is produced from this order will be one which we have never seen in our history. So, and that's not to say there are many, many, many genuine, sincere Orthodox ulama. There are many. But remember this, for to have that lofty status, to be the inheritors of the Anbiya alayhi salam, to be those to be obeyed and followed, there's caveats. You need to be like the Anbiya to be followed and be inheritors of the Anbiya. For you to be a ruler or a leader that needs to be obeyed, Allah says in the Quran that follow Allah, His Messenger, and those who rule amongst you. The caveat is that they need to follow Allah and His Messenger. If you don't follow Allah and His Messenger, then as a leader or a ruler, quite frankly, it's questionable whether you should be obeyed and followed. And for you as a scholar to be given that maqam, that lofty status, to be that of the inheritor of the prophets, yeah, then your behavior and your outward actions and rulings and stuff needs to be reflective of that of the Anbiya in these very unique and troubling and testing times.
Barakallahu feek, Brother Dilly, for these words, sharing with our listeners and viewers. We are out of time, but I think we covered a lot of ground here. Brother Dilly, can you tell us where, if people are interested in reading more of your work, seeing you, listening to you, where can they find you?
So brothers and sisters, of course, bookmark and follow 5pillarsyuk.com. Inshallah, there's some big things happening in the pipeline with the UK and North America in the coming month, as with Australia. You can follow me on Twitter at Dilly Hussain 88, same on Instagram. And to read all my articles, you can find them all archived at dillysdesk.com. And to see all my lectures and media contributions, you can go to Dilly Desk YouTube channel where there's an archive. So yeah, holla at me, watch it, read it, provide me feedback. Let's have some meaningful discussion. And I pray that any khair that comes from this podcast that you all tuned into today, that is of some benefit, and it was and may Allah bless Brother Daniel for facilitating it as well. Ameen.
Ameen. Barakallahu feek. Barakallahu feekum to our viewers. May Allah accept your dua and accept our dua to strengthen the Muslims in the UK and around the world to fight against some of these ideologies and this system against us. We will see you next week on Muslim Skeptic Live, inshallah, with another episode. So please tune in there. Don't forget to check out MuslimSkeptic.com. You can also check out alasna.org if you're interested in information related to fighting doubts in Islam. So check us out on those venues. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.